good question for anybody is, how do you know your belief is actually true? Because we work off of our beliefs, we do things based off of what we believe is true and accurate. It makes sense to know, or to have to look internally and say, how do I know what I believe is actually a true thing? And so it's a legitimate claim or a question for those who are skeptical of the Christian faith to ask a Christian, how do you know your belief is actually true? For me, there's four main reasons of how I know that my belief is actually true. And the first one is that God has to have been the one who's spoken for Christianity to be true. If God has not revealed who he is to humanity, how would we ever know who he is? So God has to have taken the first step to reach out and speak to humanity. And in the Christian worldview, we know this based off of signs and wonders. God proved it was him who was speaking by doing miraculous deeds. And we see examples of this, like in Exodus 19, when he brings the law to the children of Israel, that we have the mountain that is trembling. We have God descending on the mountain like fire. You have this blast of a trumpet sound, though there is nobody playing a trumpet as he's coming to speak to the people. So he does great signs and miracles that way. And then we also see him doing prophecy, right? In the biblical worldview, God is outside of time, so it makes sense that he would be able to tell us what is going to be happening into the future. And God does that. He tells humanity, this is what's going to be happening in a future time. And he asks the people to trust him in doing those things, and he's proved it. And we even have things in the Bible that talk about things that are yet to happen to help us to be able to see, even in our day and age, his prophecies fulfilled. Second would be God's journalist. God didn't always choose to use or speak himself, but he chose other people to speak for him. And he does the same thing that he does for himself, that he's going to prove that through signs and wonders, or we might call these miracles. And we see this in like Acts chapter 5, verse 12, where we're told that the apostles went around doing signs and wonders. And why does God do that? To authenticate his message, right? The apostles were going around and telling people about the work of Jesus Christ and the forgiveness of sins. And in order for God to show the people that, yes, this is true, I'm backing up what they have to say, and I'm the one that is giving them this information, he has them do things outside of the laws of nature, what we call signs and wonders or miracles, things that a normal human being would not be able to do. He also gives them the ability to speak prophecy, right? God, in knowing the future, would tell them the future so that they could express it to other people. And there is, in the Bible, that he would give warnings of this, right? If somebody was to prophesy, saying they're prophesying in my name, but this prophecy doesn't come true, get rid of them. Don't believe them, because they are a false prophet. So they had to have 100% accuracy. And we see examples of this, like in Isaiah 53, right? Where Isaiah prophesies of Jesus' death on the cross in a very vivid way. It's very clear that he's speaking of crucifixion in that passage. But he's foretelling this over 700, 800 years before crucifixion is even invented yet. And for the children of Israel, this is 1,000 years before they'll ever even see crucifixion happen before their eyes. And so God will authenticate his journalists, the people who are speaking for him through signs and wonders and prophecy. The third category is it has to correspond to reality. Your beliefs have to correspond to reality that you know it. And the Christian worldview does just that. Even the Bible itself proclaims that it's not spreading clearly devised myths, right? Myths are things where you kind of hype up something to try to make it bigger than what it is. And the Bible is special in this and not being myth. It gives the dirty laundry of the prominent people of God, right? Even David, who is the big king of Israel, the one that's after God's own heart, but we're told a lot of things that David did wrong and that makes him look bad. Even Jesus, in picking his disciples, one of his disciples betrays him. So the Bible will air the dirty laundry. It has authentic times of silence where it doesn't speak in areas that we would expect it to speak upon. But even above the idea of not being myth, it corresponds to reality in the fact that it's rooted in time and space and history. And the authors of the Bible that were writing down God's words were very specific to say, this was who was ruling and reigning at this time. Here are the people that were involved in this account. This is where this took place. The message of the Bible was one that was written in a way that we can go and look for ourselves. To the original audience, they could go to these places that were being spoken of. A lot of times it spoke about eyewitnesses. These are the people that are here. Go speak to them yourself. Go check this out. For those of us that are further away in time and space and culture, we can use the sciences to do that. Because the biblical authors were so specific, we can go and say, does this place really exist? Did this battle actually happen? And we can use archaeology and other sciences to see, did these things take place? And we see that they do correspond to reality. They do correspond to history. Every time the Bible has been mocked by saying, oh, the authors didn't know what they were talking about by talking about this leader during this time frame, it doesn't take very long in history, and then a little bit more research, we find, oh, actually, the Bible was exactly accurate. It was our understanding of history that was flawed. And so the Bible corresponds to reality in those ways. And it also helps us by understanding the preconditions of intelligibility, of how we can just function in an intelligent way in this world. You have to have a reason for knowing that your senses are trustworthy. How do I know what I'm seeing is actually what I'm seeing? What I'm hearing is actually what I'm hearing? How do I know all these internal things are actually working appropriately? And the Bible gives us an ability to understand that's real, right? We're created in God's image, and God says, hear the words that I'm speaking. Behold this that is before you, telling us to use our senses, showing us that they are reliable. Our minds, right? How do we know what we're thinking is actually accurate information in our minds, that we can actually process things in a logical format, right? The laws of logic that would actually apply, that this isn't just a random chemical reaction going on inside this matter that we call a brain, and so there's no real value into it. But again, we have God calling out and saying, reason through these things, ponder these things, think about these things, telling us that our mind is something of value. We have an idea of understanding what's right and what's wrong. Where do you come up with that? What is the standard of right and wrong in a world, right? We have God in His Word saying these are the things that are good and these are the things that are bad, and this is how you can base your life on. And so the Bible corresponds to reality. We can see that it's happening, and we know that we can intellectually understand reality based on the biblical worldview. The last piece, and I think Dr. Greg Bahnsen is the one who coined the phrase that Christianity is in a league of its own. And this is beyond even just atheism, but even all other religions. There's no other religion that makes the same kind of claims that the Bible does in order to have assurance that our belief is true. Now, there's a few religions that we would call parasitical to Christianity, that they're taking parts of Christianity and kind of making them their own, but then adding to it or taking away from Christianity. And these would have to fall apart through internal critique. But they also they have a hard time with this third category of corresponding to reality. But all other religions fall apart in the aspect of nobody else makes the types of claims the Bible does in order to have assurance of your belief. No other system out there has an infallible verbal revelation from an all-knowing personal God. And that is crucial, right? It has to be infallible. It has to be without errors. And it has to be verbal. It has to be God communicating to humanity, that He's the one that has spoken, right? It has to be from an all-knowing God, a God that knows all things, because if God doesn't really know all things, then how can we trust what it is that this God is saying? And He has to be a personal God, right? He has to be one who has communicated with humanity and is active in His creation. And no other religion has all those pieces together. And so if I was to believe in one of those other religions, I'd have to take a step back with this question of how do I know my belief is actually true, and say, wow, I don't know that my belief is actually true because God has never actually spoken to us. We just have people who have written these things down, or this is just people in isolation who have told us that they have heard from God, but we don't really have any way to test these things out, or it's all head knowledge and none of it is historical, so there's no way to go out and verify that these things are actually true, or this God never claims to have not made errors, or the writers never claim to not make any kind of errors, and so we'd have to take a step back and say, well, I'm not really sure if I can hold that my belief system is actually accurate. So how do I know my belief is actually true? Well, I have a God who has spoken to me and has spoken to humanity, and he has proved that through signs and wonders. And he hasn't just chosen to speak himself, but he's used other people to be his journalists, right? To speak for him. And he's proved that he has chosen them to speak through miracles and signs and wonders and prophecy. And then everything I read in the Bible, it corresponds to reality. I can go and I can check these things out. And also I have a reason to believe why I can trust my senses to be able to test these things out and to reason through these things. And then lastly, there's no other religion that's even in competition with the Bible. Nobody else makes these kind of claims to be able to hold to an accurate belief. If I was into one of these other religions, I would have to take a step back and say, there's pieces that are missing for me to actually know that this is true. But with Christianity, I can have that assurance.